Well, welcome to Coffeeist, and today we're going to investigate El Salvador coffees. Now, everyone's heard of Colombian coffee, Brazil coffees, maybe you've even heard of Mocha Java. As Ken was explaining to me, El Salvador coffees have a really interesting history.
El Salvador is the smallest country in Central America. In the modern times, it has a very colorful and interesting coffee history. When I first started in coffee, and specialty coffee was just starting in the 70s, for me, the whole world started in the 70s with specialty coffee. El Salvador produced a very, very large amount of coffee for such a small country. It produced about, I think it was fifth or sixth in the world in a normal year in the 70s. El Salvador was a favorite origin for specialty food stores that didn't want to have the ordinary Colombia, so they would put in El Salvador. And it was renowned for being very sweet, balanced cup, unlike Colombia, which had a reputation for more forceful acidity and bigger body. El Salvador was dominated by large growers. It still is to a degree, very sophisticated farmers. What happened is in the 80s, it turned into a civil war, let's say, but it was a violent unrest. And there were death squads and that whole sad kind of scene in the 80s. And coffee was just pretty much abandoned. A lot of brilliant coffee lands that were basically just let go. In the 1990s, with peace, the producers started to come back to coffee. And when they came back to it, it's sort of like they came back to coffee that time had forgotten for a decade. The varieties that they planted and expanded were traditional varieties. I'll talk about those in a minute, but they weren't a lot of the newer hybrid varieties that were being planted elsewhere. And that's remained El Salvador's strength, and that's why this cupping should be exciting today, because they've maintained. I'll go into what happened afterwards, more history, but they've maintained those varieties. And the varieties, the two most interesting are Bourbon, which most people know is one of the two great streams of variety in Arabica. There's Typica and Bourbon. Well, they had Typica also in El Salvador that they maintained, but the Bourbon in particular. And Bourbon it's not the kind of variety that you immediately recognize as different or exceptional. It tends to just, if you're doing ratings of coffee, it tends to come out higher. It's Bourbon. And there's a certain kind of character to Bourbon, a kind of a sweet, savory fruit. I think most people recognize it most clearly in the Kenya coffees, which are Bourbon types. And in other words, the basic production, which was Bourbon based in El Salvador, was very good, very interesting compared with a lot of other origins. The other variety is called Pacamara. Pacamara, which you probably know, it's a big bean. And what happened was that the El Salvador coffee authorities at one point worked on a hybrid, all Arabica hybrid between Pacas, which is a Bourbon-based tree that grows small. Producers like it because it's small and it's easy to pick. But Margajipe, they took the Mara from Margajipe and Paca from the Pacas and produced Pacamara. It's a tricky hybrid to grow, and it has to be edited after some of the plants revert to one of the two parents, and it has to be removed in the seedlings. But nevertheless, it has two things. It has these big showy beans, which people can recognize. Oh, it's different. That's big beans.
Oh, yeah.
And the other thing about it is that it tastes a little different. It tends to have this deep, sweet, savory character. And also, I hope we get some today, these fine, floaty floral notes. I mean, that's at its most characteristic. But it's always a good cup. So those two varieties increasingly that were grown in El Salvador and really dominated the production. Starting in about 2004 with a Cup of Excellence, a green coffee competition, specialty world began to recognize how exceptional this was. The industry really took off for a few years. It was at least, in specialty circles, if you were keeping track. Certainly all the dyers knew about these El Salvador coffees. Then the rust hit in 2012, another disaster. In this case, of course, the trees that they were planting, these precious varieties, were particularly susceptible to rust. Whereas in other countries which had planted hybrids with Robusta in them, like next door to, to El Salvador, they planted almost all hybrid varieties. So at a time in the rust when the El Salvador production just plummeted, 60-70% drop off in production, eventually they came back. The industry has reconstituted itself. At this point, you see the coffee community, the specialty growing community in El Salvador had a choice, right? They were at a crossroads. They could go with the hybrids, plant like Honduras did, or they could stick to their older varieties on which the fame of their industry was based. And they decided to take the high road. So what we have today are revivals, I hope, very select and I hope splendid varieties. So that's the El Salvador story, and a coffee-specific story. For me, a very exciting one. It's exciting that the producers and the coffee authorities are trying to take the high road and stick with quality and exciting varieties. I'm hoping that they'll pop in the cup when we taste them.
I don't know about you, but I'm ready to drink some coffee. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more shows like this.